Hey guys, what's up? And welcome back to Digital Artcast. Change of scenery for the moment. I have moved my office. I'm currently working from home, so if it sounds slightly more echoey or just different in general, that is the reason. Again, during this time where we are on lockdown and the world is kind of spinning in chaos, I'm glad that you guys came back to listen to another episode and take in what I had to say and my guests had to say. I always feel like we have a very positive message to send it to you guys, and hopefully you learn and grow with each one of these talks that we have on here. Again, if you're listening and anywhere else, you can check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, loads of places you will find podcasts typically. During this time as well, I'm trying to get just a little bit more people on, release a few extra episodes just because I have just a little bit more free time now that I'm working completely from home and can't leave. So yeah, I have to have something to focus on. Today's guest is someone that I've kind of came across in several chats or different organizations or things that I've looked into, even when I was doing stuff in 3D art. This name came up a couple of times, and we got talking online and decided that it would be good to have him on just to talk about his experience, because it probably is quite unique, and just a general look into his process and his way of thinking, because I did think at times listening to him talk and teach that there was a definite unique spin on how he approached the industry, and definitely how he looks at management and other tools within working in AAA games. So without further ado, let me introduce today's guest, and that is Lukas Stratmann. So hey Lucas, what's up?
Hi there. You're doing well. How's everything?
Yeah,
Thanks for having me on. It's
yeah, of course, man, definitely. Yeah, because we kind of first bumped into each other, I think, in the Dynasty Discord. I think was the
yes,
first place we were talking.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's where I spend most of my time nowadays when
yeah,
I'm sort of at home. It's a really great community where I become a partner and I'm uploading YouTube videos, but also spending lots of time in the actual chat, helping people, and just overall art discussion and learning together is sort of the main point there.
yeah. Because when we first started kind of talking, it was to get you on the podcast, but also I didn't realize that you were also the mind behind their moving to Blender series. So if artists wanted to integrate to Blender or learn Blender for 3D production, you kind of made a 10-part video series at the time on making that jump and learning Blender for kind of game pipelines. So but then are you using Blender exclusively now? Is that kind of your go-to?
Well, in general, I always say I use whatever software I have to. If I can choose, I use Blender. Certainly at home, I do, and I have in the past in productions. But yeah, I think Blender itself for me has always been sort of multiple reasons of why I liked it. So we can obviously get into that. It had this great explosion where suddenly a lot of people are more interested in it, and I thought it'd be a really cool moment to approach it from a hey, you're an artist in the industry, you know how to 3D model, you just don't know the software. And a lot of tutorials out there will teach you how to make, a donut. But someone who has 10 years of experience kind of knows how to spawn in a circle and thicken it, right? So I think that to me was, I'd like to help people get used to the program, knowing full well that they might be way better than me at art. That was sort of my initial thought on how to start tutorials.
Yeah, so I mean, like in general, I think it's interesting how, I mean, for me especially, because when I was almost learning parts of 3D, I was definitely more Maya focused or the traditional tools focused. But then when we spoke to Alex Beddoes, who we had on the podcast not too long ago, he was talking about like the power of Blender is real. There is legitimate companies now like Ubisoft and Epic who are investing serious money in the software. I think we also talked about this slightly when we talked to Alex, but it is becoming more mainstream in studios now. Is that the case? Like, especially, I mean, you're. So, I mean, just really quickly for people who don't know, could you just introduce yourself, like who you are, where you're working currently, your kind of previous experience, just so we get a grounding in where you are
Right.
just now?
Just short introduction to myself. So I'm currently a level artist at Ubisoft Annecy. Worked on Division 2 Warlords, just came out. Um, Before I joined here, I was with a smaller company called Kerno Interactive, and before that at Animator Games as a QA coordinator. At Kerno, I was an environment artist and also did sort of, we call it art supervision. It was mainly just managing most of the art team, a lot of the outsourced stuff to just make sure we get everything we need, get the art quality we need. I've done a lot of things, mainly around Red Orchestra 2, Rising Storm 2. That's sort of the main first. I always say I have sort of 10 years of experience making first-person shooters, and then obviously Division was a really nice change into third person. And I
But then
actually
it's interesting.
sorry.
Yeah, I was going. No, I was going to say because it's interesting. We were talking about this before the podcast started. Is that you took the route where, like, from my understanding, I thought you came straight from college into work, but you were telling about this whole story where you actually started as like a games journalist almost, and then you were in remote QA testing, and you got into QA full time, and that like there's this whole. I mean, you can dive into as much as you want or try and break it apart, but maybe start at the beginning and try and give a brief, if you can give a brief overview of like your whole journey.
So I still haven't actually found a good way of telling this story because most of the time it either sounds like I was doing too much or was doing too little, or there's no really good a middle path of like it's not a very straight line.
Right. Yeah.
So I want to say in the mid 2000s, I was more and more interested in video games. The really funny thing about me is I never really was playing too many video games. I never had a video game console until 2007. I had a PC and I was playing like Age of Empires 2 for 10 years. And in the
Nice.
mid 2000s, I was getting more interested in video games, but I was mainly getting interested in video game reviews. And when Age of Empires 3 came out, I was like, I want to be a video game reviewer. I want to start a YouTube channel. And this must have been like, 2006, 7? I'm not quite sure when it came out.
Wow.
And sort of made my way into that, working for smaller websites, starting my own in 2010. And I always call that the life I don't talk about. It is very much I'm trying to be professional, but I'm also a teenager. And it did work out. We got review copies from every large major publisher, and it was really great time. Out of that, connections out of that grew that I started to be a QA tester for Rising Storm 1. This is 2012. And I really enjoyed that. It's like not bi-weekly, twice a week rather, testing of maps, gameplay testing, feedback for gameplay, but also bug testing. And then just sort of staying with that, I became a tester for Animator Games, and then moved to England to be a full-time tester and QA coordinator later on. While I was there, because I always knew at that point I switched from wanting to be a games journalist to wanting to make games. And while I was in England, I sort of started to get more interest in 3D. I had used Blender since 2007, I want to say. Yeah, 7. When an art teacher of mine said, "Hey, there's this really cool program. I think you would like it. You're kind of a computer nerd. You'll like this." And I've always been around it, but I never really fully realized the potential of 3D. And when I was in England, I finally was able to get into it. A couple people in the office really, really helped me to get into it. And you mentioned this yourself, starting with Maya or the quote unquote more traditional software. Everyone in the office is 3ds Max, right? The only reason I was using Blender is because we couldn't really justify the QA guy in his lunch break having a 3ds Max license. So I was like, oh, I'll use Blender. It's fine. I just want to get more into it. And I was helping with like blockout modeling for the level designers and stuff. And at the same time, I'm learning it, but I'm learning it from people using 3ds Max. I'm watching 3ds Max tutorials and then doing them in Blender. So from the get-go, when I really got into 3D, I'm learning it removed from software. I'm not learning a software, I'm learning 3D and then doing it in the software I have. And from the very first day, I started to use GIMP 2.6 and Blender, and I said I'll change to 3ds Max and Photoshop once I run into a roadblock where I can't do the things the tutorial is doing. I was using Photoshop within a week because at the time GIMP wasn't really that good. And I've never switched away from Blender, basically, because it's always been a way to do it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
when I left England and became an environment artist, I continued to use it. But then also I moved back home, and because I'm really interested in management, as I was doing QA coordinator, I had a team of five remote people, or
Hmm.
actually six at a time. I've always been extremely interested in, how do we make the team perform well? How do we, mold a team that will work at peak efficiency or even longer? Like
Yeah.
how do we make a team want to work more than they're paid for, and then tell them to not do it because we don't want them to overwork, right? Like, how do we fire up our team? That's always been sort of my main interest. And so I went back home and I said, oh, okay, I want to become an artist. I want to become an artist in AAA. I was already an artist. I was working for a former colleague who'd started a new company. And I went to uni, but I went to uni for 3D and management. And I said to myself, I'll have 3 years of time to become really good at art, to become a AAA artist. But I'm really only interested in the management side because I'm working full time in art anyway. And I'll
Right.
just
Yeah.
become a AAA artist while working.
Hmm.
And half of the uni was really easy for me because it was, beginner 3D stuff. But at
Right.
uni, we're actually using Cinema 4D. So I'm now
Okay.
switching between Max, Cinema 4D, and Blender at home. And then sort of the more uni became management, the less Cinema 4D I was using, and really the more Blender I was using. And this is still 2.7. Um,
Right.
so I'm coming out of uni. I'm working for Kerno. I'm being an environment artist. I'm being a manager at the company as well in terms of art. Um, and then I somehow managed to get into Ubisoft ANSI, which is amazing to me still. At the
Yeah.
same time as Blender 2.8 becomes really big. So this sort of goes in hand, where I'm like, for the longest time, I was thinking, okay, I'll just have to learn Max and really get into 3ds Max. I've been using it sort of on the side, but not really. I don't really like it too much. I prefer Blender, but I know I will have to get into Max because chances are, everyone knows sort of like this company is using Maya, this company is using Max, and I think, for me there was always this: I will just have to switch to the quote unquote standard.
Yeah.
Um, and then somehow it was like, well, now 2.8 is out and everyone's talking about it. And for the last 10 years, I've been telling people it's a great software, and now they realized it. And so this was this really weird awakening of, I'm coming out of uni and I know what I'm talking about. I've been an artist at that point for 4 years. And I was like,
Right.
well, I'll just do tutorials and I'll share my knowledge of the software as I'm transitioning into being in AAA.
Yeah.
And yeah, it
But
kind of just,
also,
yeah.
yeah, I was going to say, but Blender also, I think was good, up until that point. But when it hit 2.7, it was like, it was almost a different piece of software. Like it wasn't as noticeably the same as it was at like 2.6, for instance. I know Blender Guru, had done a whole video series on like why 2.7, is like the bee's knees, like why it is so good, why it's
Well,
so
you
different.
mean 2.8 in comparison to
Two-
2.7?
Okay, right, yeah. So that
Um,
would be the switch. Yeah,
I would actually disagree.
yeah. Okay,
I think so. Again, I first opened Blender in 2007, 2.4, and
right.
I never got into 3D modeling. And I'm going to outright say it's because A, I was a dumb little kid who didn't realize what the software could do, but B, it just wasn't a good software at the time. I think it was a software where you really had to, you really, if you wanted to use it, you could, but if you just getting into it, it was very steep learning curve and kind of odd and awkward.
Right,
And
yeah.
the same with 2010. I was doing a couple animations. 2.6, I don't think was a good software, and to me, it becomes a good software with 2.7. I honestly don't see the difference between 2.7 and 2.8 other than the UI. Most of the things are simply reorganized and slightly changed. You can open a 2.8 file in 2.7 and it'll just work because, I mean, it's Blender, it just works. But the UI rearranges because literally they've just changed a couple default options. But those changes in default options made it seem to most people like, oh, it's now suddenly a real contender. And switching to left click being the left click select being the default option also sort of removed the mental hurdles you have to go through to switch to Blender. Even though right click is still better, but
Yeah.
we don't talk about that. Yes, it's an argument you'll always lose. But those
Yeah.
people who switch to right click go, "Oh yeah, I understand what you meant. It is better because it is, but can't really argue it." But I think what 2.8 did is 2.8 opened up 2.7 to people by pretending like it's entirely new. And I mean, it changed a lot of things. Don't get me wrong. They added the entire PBR pipeline. That was flashy. 2.8 is a flashy update that tells you cool things are coming. And out of that came the explosion of funding. And you look at the dev fund, there's like Intel, AMD, Nvidia, Ubisoft, animation, whatever, Tangent Animation, Embark, you name it, they're on there, right? And they're nearly at 100,000 euros a month now for funding. Epic is on there as well, obviously, with their what was it, 10,000 a month or something. Out of that explosion of money came suddenly a rush of new features. And if you look at it, 2.8 in beta was basically 2.7 with a different UI and a different renderer and a couple things removed. And then 2.81, 2.82, and now 2.83 coming out, there is major changes. The sculpting is completely overhauled. The cloth suddenly has become way better and like has things added to it, which, pressure, for example, really important, didn't have it before. So really, I think 2.7 was already usable, but just it had the baggage of not looking like a good software when it already was. And then 2.8 removed the baggage, and then 2.81 made it a good software in the sense of like, now it's actually better than some of the standard software.
Yeah, I think also because Blender has such a myriad of tools that are usable within it, because it's not just like a 3D software. It can also do 2D, it can do use grease pencil, it can also animate, it can edit video. It has a real-time engine built into it that can use to render stuff and be moved in real time. So it comes as like a whole kind of complete package. There's a lot of things that are just built in it, as opposed to like Max or Maya that maybe do one or two things specifically.
Yeah, so they said before that their goal really is, Blender 3.0, let's say, to have a software to make a feature film. So because they also have that animation studio, which is detached from the foundation, but it's a studio that they work together.
I mean, they're technically already making films, right?
They're making short films, and they have. So the cool thing about Blender is it's made for everyone, but then their own animation team is using it in production and is giving feedback as it's being developed. So it's kind of halfway between an internal tool and a tool that everyone is making at the same time. So there's really this myriad of different approaches and how it's being made, and it's molded by people using it. And that is, I think, what makes it so strong is, you are annoyed by something, you go on the forums, you say that. If everyone else is annoyed by it, you get lots of upvotes, and then they change it, or someone else changes it and they integrate the change. So that really helps it. And but going back to their goal is to make a feature film, so not just a short film. And they said before, I want to make a feature film entirely in Blender, maybe using other open source software for like texturing, but even that you can do in Blender. So for us in games art, that's kind of overkill. In certainly in environment art, level art, you don't really need a video editor. And a lot of people are like, well, that's kind of pointless. Why are they spending time and energy? But then they're kind of not, because it's by someone who did it, who then puts their work in and they integrate it. So it wants to be everything, and it wants to be decent at everything, but it realizes, and I think this is it's key, it realizes that it won't ever beat ZBrush or Marvelous Designer or Marmoset, right? It won't beat the software made for the specific task, but it'll be the baseline of, like, I have opened ZBrush, I think, once, because I never really sculpt. And if I have to sculpt, like maybe taking off some edges of a wooden box, Blender is enough for that. Blender isn't the go-to software for sculpting. Don't get me wrong. Even now with all the changes, I would still recommend people pick up ZBrush if they want to sculpt. But I mean, for scraping off a couple edges, do you have to learn ZBrush, or do you just quickly go over it in Blender?
Because because I think ZBrush is very specifically aimed towards people who want to be character artists full time,
I
because
mean, even in
then
environment art, you see people using it. Like
yeah,
make a rock, for example.
yeah,
But then there's the question of, like, for me, the question becomes: is that really the best way in terms of, well, the best way is always a question that is a non-question, because it depends on the circumstance. But is it the
yeah,
best way to do a rock for the circumstance? If you enjoy doing it, if you enjoy sculpting, pick up ZBrush. I had a friend of mine who, for this is at uni, she, for 3 years, she was really interested in, being an artist and making art, and she's an incredible sculptor in, with actual clay in real life. And for 3 years, she's like, "What is this?" Like, she couldn't get her head around Cinema 4D. It's like she did not enjoy what she was doing. And then in like the last semester, someone gave her ZBrush, and within, I want to say, 4 weeks, she was making characters and she was making art that was incredible. And so I think, having the right software for the right task is very important. And this is, you know, my opinion of Blender is it's a cool software and all of that, but it's not the end all, right? It's not the end all be all. It's a software, it's a tool in your shed, and it might be the correct tool, but it might not be the correct tool. So if you are doing lots of sculpting, you're probably picking up ZBrush and you're probably using that. If you're doing a lot of cloth, you're probably using Marvelous Designer. And so I think it's a really interesting base tool, and it has lots of potential procedurally, where I think the future is going towards. Non-destructive workflows. I've used it in a non-destructive way, where I've been able to change entire structures within 15 minutes, and I didn't have to do the UVs again. I didn't have to do the collision again, because they're all linked together in reference and all that stuff. So I think Blender has clear advantages, but it also is very clearly just another tool. What I really hate on Twitter, the shitstorm that goes over Autodesk every time they do something, and everyone in the comments goes, "But Blender," like, it doesn't matter, right? If someone wants to use Maya, let them use Maya. So I think we have to watch out there to not talk too much about the software in the end of the day, because it's about the art you make with it.
yeah. I think it's also apparent to a lot of 2D artists who will use stuff like, Painter Tool Sai or Sketchbook. Like there's variations even on drawing. Like, Photoshop isn't, although it's industry standard, of course. If you can achieve the same effects in Sketchbook Pro or even Procreate now, Procreate. I don't want to say Procreate is like the Blender of the 2D world, but Procreate for a long time, when it was early engineered, but people were saying, "Oh, it's a good thing to draw on iPad. It's got really cool tools, but it'll never." But now I know people specifically who are working professionally as concept artists in Procreate full time without a desktop. So I mean, like, yeah, I think the baseline skills of drawing will always be apparent, but the software is just a tool, right? The same as
Exactly. Yeah. I think
yeah,
that's literally, I mean, that's all you need to know about software. Is when someone asks you which software should I be using, it's like the one that makes the most sense in your current financial situation. Because honestly, going into any job, expect to change software, pipeline, and everything. And it's not about knowing a software, it's about knowing what to do with that software. And it doesn't matter if I press P to separate something in Blender, or if I press the detach button in Max, it does the same.
yeah. And I mean, like, in an instance, I know again what you're saying is true. Is that the software is just as the tool, but then I think it's also about how easily that software makes you feel. Like your workflow is. I know I'm trying to think of the words to explain this, but more flowy is not a word.
Well,
But
at
then,
home, really, I think that's what you're looking for. Is
well, Procreate especially. I think the reason Procreate for me works as a tool when you draw and paint is because the software gets out of the way and just lets you make art. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what I personally get with Blender. Just, I mean, this is just personal preference. In the end of the day, it's, for me, Blender is a set of operators, because that's literally what it is. It's a set of operators and a set of data chunks, essentially, and it just lets me do things. I don't have to twist and bend. It just works, and it's not annoying me. And there's a couple of things where it is, but most of the time, as a software, you look at, like, at a couple of problems sometimes online, you Google for something, and usually in Blender there is a way of combining different operators to get the result. And that really, to me, it goes to that problem solving. Although people have contested me on that opinion, and it's just an opinion, but I always thought that, to me, Blender felt a bit more in the direction of problem solving. It's more open. It's a more sort of, you're working closer to the core. There is no, it didn't used to have a good UI, and it still
Mm.
doesn't really have a good UI.
Right, yeah.
There is no button for it, because you have a keyboard in front of you, and then sure, it's somewhere in the menu. But in the end of the day, you're just calling this operator, and it doesn't really matter, what you use. And I'm constantly telling people to not use the toolbar on the left in 2.8, because it's slowing people down, because you could just be calling that operator right away. And then once they realize what I'm saying, most people go, oh yeah, you're actually right. Like, it takes longer to learn, but it's a heck of a lot faster, and it doesn't get in my way. It's not annoying. And I think that's really the strength of Blender, where you go to your tech artist and you're like, well, we talk about pipeline, and we talk about having to integrate, heavily integrated pipelines, with lots of, I don't know, using Max and Next script or whatever. You can't really easily port that to a different software, obviously. But like, I wouldn't call myself a tech artist. I wouldn't call myself a coder. And I've been making small add-ons in Python for a year now, where I was like, oh, maybe this would be a good export script for me to make my life easier. And it is very clear and clean, and it just works. It just works. Everything is open. And then if you have an actual tech artist in front of you, and they really want to change something, the source code is right there. You can just compile your own Blender if you like to, right? So any problem you have, you can fix. And if you, for example, have a crash or a bug, you can just go online on the bug tracker, and you can put it in. You can see if it's already there. You can see the developer discussing it. It is very transparent. It is very open. And I think because it's molded by that openness and by the people, it's pushing a lot faster and harder into the future than other software is.
Yeah,
So I think,
because it's open source also, which makes it easy for, like you said, people to take their own tools and their own mindsets of what they want in the software, and then that can be integrated if it's popular enough.
exactly. I mean, this is really interesting. And to some people, it's mind-boggling. If someone gives, like Epic gave them, or over 2 years, I think, was it 2 million or $1 million in funding?
Yeah.
They didn't get anything for that. Like,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
you have a contract with Autodesk, and you
Mhm.
will get support, and you'll get a direct line to maybe request new features. I don't know, but I'm assuming that's the case.
Right.
And in Blender, they literally go, thank you. You have the same voice than, you know, Joe over there, who hasn't paid anything. Because
Yeah.
if, someone pays 5,000 a month, doesn't matter if it's a company or an individual,
Mhm.
they don't have more say over what new features come in. If they want a new feature, they put in a proposal on the forums, and if people discuss it and people like it, people upvote it, it'll become a
Mhm.
feature. So if you want change, you can be the catalyst of it, you can support it, and it'll happen, right? Something
Yeah.
is annoying, it'll happen. And so I think that's democracy in the end of the day.
Yeah,
Oh,
definitely. And I think it's also interesting where I think these companies now are investing like Ubisoft, like Epic, because they want to see, they want to see change in the industry. They're kind of maybe even like, maybe not sick of, but just don't want to be paying my licenses for every 3D artist in their team, because their worlds are so big, their 3D teams are so big. So they're thinking, like, if we can switch everybody to Blender eventually, then there's a zero cost right there.
well, I mean, that probably certainly is a thought, but I also think it's, again, I don't know this, but I'm assuming it, is a lot of people are now interested in the software, and here's an opportunity for very little cost to support it, to have, more importantly than money, the best way of supporting Blender is by developing for it, right? And if you do the math and you look at how many licenses, even if you get a discount, how many licenses a large company has to have of a 3D
Mm,
software for environment artists, you could just hire a programmer to make the software better, rather
right.
than spending that money on hopefully having the other company fix it. But the thing about this is, it might not fit for your business model, and we have to be very honest. I'm not an animator, but from what I know, Blender is not the best animation tool, right? If in terms of
Mm,
like game art, I can see a lot of shortcomings. I can see a lot of integration with like motion builder and all that stuff where Blender isn't going to really work out for you. So I think what it is, it's a well, not for Epic, but for other companies, a decently cheap way of supporting what could be the future. And it is
Yeah.
really future proofing because, so I was thinking about this in preparation for our chat here. If you look at it with how Blender is progressing and how open it is in procedural and in semi procedural ways, and in my honest opinion, Houdini and procedural approaches are the future for a lot of things, not for everything, but for a lot of things. Blender is going that direction as well, where you can do a lot of things and you can save a lot of time. And with animation nodes coming in soon, or everything nodes coming in soon in the actual main software, not just the experimental branch, where you see online already people have like automatic ropes for like harbors, like hempen ropes that are like slung around whatever a prop. It's like, yeah, you can do that by hand and it takes you 2 hours, or you just have this little script that someone made in animation notes to read a couple points, Houdini style. And
Hmm.
once you have that tool, if I'm working on Sales of War, which is a ship game, it's my personal project. The amount of times that I'm like, it'd be really cool to just have like a rope around this little piece of wood. If I have a script that does it for me and I do it 20 times, I've saved time. And so for me, this is, I think, where you separate sort of the artist doing art from the production mindset of, well, I can spend 4 hours or I can spend 4 days making a tool that'll in the end save me 30 days of work. Or if I make a portfolio piece, I can just do 4 days to make a really cool looking rope because I'm only making one and I don't really care about reproducing that same result 40 times. And so I think in a production mindset, suddenly Blender is a very open platform where you can integrate tools into it or use it as a tool to save time.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting as well where I've had this conversation with some environment artists where you talk about, you know, oh, there's so many scripts that will bully and stuff and retopologize really quickly, and by clicking like one button, and there's this script that does this in Maya, and there's this thing that does this in Blender. But then an environment artist did say to me, but then again, he had been in the industry for a while, was like, yeah, we do get a lot of juniors coming in who will rely heavily on scripts. Do you feel that? I mean, you as a junior artist, do you feel like that's something you worry about sometimes? Is that you don't, or you maybe are missing some of the key elements of building some things yourself, or is it all kind of more like, is time more important to you than learning those things?
So, for myself personally, for example, sculpting, I've never really gotten into sculpting. I do a lot of things with displacement and just displacement maps and generating like, wood destruction by using a clouds texture, for example. I think it's a different way of getting the same thing. But I would say that certainly, the people who really have no experience coming into the industry, if they rely on the automation button, you have to learn the rules before you can break them. And when I started learning it, when I started in the industry, sort of like even back as QA when I was doing blockout modeling or helping out the art team sometimes, I learned how to texture in Photoshop. When I started, Substance Painter was just becoming popular, and I mean, I learned from people who were teaching me how to make art in 2005, essentially, some of them anyway, which was really good because my foundation, personally, is I have an understanding of how to do it. I might not be amazing at how to do it, at doing it the old way, but I think if you are learning 3D, you should do it the hard way at least once or twice. You don't have to like the hard way because it's the hard way. You won't like it, but
Yeah.
I think there's a real problem of a lot of if you look at megaskins, a lot of people just pulling in an asset. And
Yeah.
I had this, a while ago. Someone asked me a question about grass not looking correctly,
Hmm.
and it turned out it was like, well, look at your material, and it turns
Yeah.
out that they were. I think we fixed the issue in the end, but it turns out that they were looking at the material instance that Megaskins had created for them when they pulled in the grass,
Oh,
and
okay.
so they didn't actually understand. I mean, there you could have an argument that as an environment artist you don't need to know the tech side of it, but they were
Right.
looking at it and they're like, oh, I'm changing the subsurface whatever like parameter,
Mhm.
but it's not doing anything. It's like, well, you're not looking at your actual material because you haven't understood what you are changing. And so I think
Right.
understanding is a very important thing. Like if you understand how to do sculpting, you should probably also do it. So I'm talking about myself, right?
Mhm.
I know that I should be better at substance designer. I know that I should be better at sculpting. I understand the uh, logic behind it. I just don't
Yeah.
like doing it, so I'm not good at it.
Okay.
And it's this thing of how much are you going to learn before you think you're industry ready. I
Yeah.
think that I personally like to know at least a theory of everything.
Yeah.
Which in itself you won't ever get there because you can't learn everything. But then also you have to be very careful because some of these older things might just not be relevant anymore, right? Um, so I think you'd have to have a detailed discussion about every single topic, but I do think there certainly is a thread of people who just hit a script and not understand what it's doing. But I would actually say that isn't exclusive to junior people. I see a lot of more senior people who will not really care about what binormal their attention space is. You know, like they were like, oh,
Yeah.
whatever, that's tech. I don't care about it. They're like, well, but your normal map is wrong. Like,
Right.
one of my favorite things to talk about is like, well, what normal tangent space are we using in this engine, and how do we sync a workflow, or you know what settings should your bake have in Substance Designer? And a lot of even more senior artists will be like, yeah, whatever, I just bake my normal map in Max. And I'm like, well, then you basically don't have a good normal map. But then I'm going into tech art at that point where I'm not really that well versed. So, I want to remove myself from that. But I think it's an extremely complex topic in industry. And there's a certain pride in doing everything by yourself.
Yeah.
But then in production, you outsource half of it anyway.
Yeah. But
So,
I think that's also a thing where you talked about, your maybe no foundation, but your end goal is probably more the management side of the art teams than being an artist, like primarily, because you said, you don't consider yourself an artist, which sounds weird, but then you are more focused on like bringing teams together, organizing structures, bringing the best out in people, all that kind of stuff, which is, like I say, I find is rarer in the industry. It's not as common. You find people more would, become an artist in the industry because they want to be, an artist. But then for you, you do want to tackle that management side more.
yeah. I mean, I do have to sort of quickly go into. I'm fully aware that saying I'm not an artist when I am an artist is kind of a paradox. Um,
Okay.
I don't consider myself an artist, and this is exclusive to me, because I see a lot of people around me who are really great artists who, they have this um, laissez-faire sort of. I want to make great art. I want to sculpt everything. Someone makes, I don't know, a 4K texture map because it looks great, right? Um, you'll see portfolio pieces and you ask them about technical sides and they go, well, it doesn't matter because it's a portfolio piece. Um, and to me, I consider myself, a an artistic technical problem solver, right? It doesn't really matter if I make the most incredible art, if in the end of the day it's not what the game needs, it's not how the game runs. We're making video games, and to me, I love working together with that pure artist who wants to make art, and I want to make sure that they can make art. But I am really, really interested in how do we make a game? How do we bring together this project where can we save time? Where can we, maybe using a displacement map to make a rock is easier than sculpting it by hand, because in the end of the day, is the player going to care about the 5 extra%? I was talking to a tech artist and he was saying, well, a lot of times artists will be like, it looks 1% better, so I want to use it. And then the tech artist goes, yeah, but it also is 50% less performant. But then the artist is like, oh, but it looks better. And like artists who are focused on making it look good, I love that, because that's their job. Right? That's our job, right? It needs to look good and it needs to work out and it needs to guide the player correctly, and it needs to um, convey the emotion, and all of that obviously is extremely important because that's our job. But in the end of the day, it needs to run, it needs to work, and I think there's a balance on your team. You got into personally, I'm really interested in the management side. I want to. My goal is to go into that management side, to be that visionaire on top.
Yeah,
And
so you're
yeah,
more for the art direction side.
yeah. I mean, I would love to be um, even like creative director more than art direction.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, I I do have not a background, but I do have an understanding of the level design. We used to do a lot of level art and level design at the same thing in sort of a couple of years ago in the other companies I worked for, just because it kind of went hand in hand. Environment artist modeling more than actually putting it in the level, sort of just everyone
Yeah.
doing everything. So I have a really solid understanding of that side. I have a good understanding of maybe how the code works, or what can be done with code. And I like problem solving, right? And to me, the goal in management is, and this is what I was really interested in studying it, is how do we make sure that the team, the line work gets the work done in the most incredible way without conflict, without killing themselves with too much overtime. How do we manage a team? How do we mold a team together? And you can go into incredible detail with that discussion of different people enable their colleagues to work, but then there is people in your team that don't perform well, but they are actually the people that make everyone else perform well. There is introducing new people into a team changes the team dynamic. Changes the team dynamic. Sometimes you have to get rid of people because they don't accept the change. There's so many interesting things of going beyond just making art, of how, because games are a teamwork, right? Nobody makes a game by themselves, certainly not a large game.
Yeah.
I mean, if there are, that's incredible, but what we have AAA companies with hundreds of people on a team to make a single video game, or even a single part of a video game. How do we navigate that troop, that large ship, into shallow waters, into the harbor, into calm waters, and then finally have it presented to the world? And I think um, to me that's interesting. And then that's why I'm saying I'm not an artist, because I my goal is to make a video game and not to make the most incredible art, because I think those are two different branches of the same main branch.
Right. So you then, would you say you feel that you're more a game developer than an artist?
That's actually a good way of putting it. Yeah, I because I'm coming from, I used to do modding in the late 2000s. Lots of modding on different engines. I went into Rising Storm, and I mean that's basically sort of also that modding background. To me, I want to make video games. I don't want to make art. And that can be a paradox, because obviously video games are art, and so it really comes down to how you define your words. But to me, I want to make a video game, and if my work has to be cut, or if my work looks slightly less good because that makes the game better, I'm all for it. I'm the first one to suggest to cut my things if I think that the overall flow is better without them. And I'm proud of my work, and I love doing art, and in that sense I am an artist. But I'm really interested in making a good game and making a good product and being on time, and making sure that everyone in the team can perform well. So I think, yeah, a game developer, but also I guess further reaching than that.
Yeah, but I mean that's again, I think those things are rarer and probably more sought after. I mean, it's almost maybe not the same as being a generalist, but there is similar patterns where you kind of are the person who can do like a lot of things quite well, and maybe don't specify one task to be like your primary resource of income. But I know when we spoke to Nick Carver, he was the same working at Blizzard. He done some 3D art and character art, he done environment art, he done some concepts. So there are people like you who maybe just enjoy the process so much, probably because you're like me, you have a background in loving and playing games, previously. So the whole process appeals to you rather than just one thing.
It's really interesting, the way you said that, because if we go back to talking about Blender, and we said it's good at everything but not amazing at anything. And that does you just described me essentially as that, and I think actually that fits together really well. It's I am the chief problem solver if I wanted to be, right? Like I would say of myself, that's what I'm best at. I'm best at problem solving, and I'm at figuring out sort of people in the team. I've always been good at that. um where I'm more interested in problem solving, and even in solving your problems. I spend most of my time nowadays, in terms of free time, on the Dynasty Discord, in troubleshooting, trying to help people, because I love seeing someone else's problem, helping them to fix it, learning from it, and knowing that they have a positive experience, knowing that I've learned more. And I usually tend to be the guy who seems to be able to remember most of the problems. Like, oh, I've seen this before 10 years ago. Here's what you do. Like, oh, UE3 had this, UE4 has this, Source had that, I don't know, Morrowind had that. Like, I think being the human hard drive of things, that's what interests me. I'm not saying I'm good at it necessarily, but I think that's just being everywhere and understanding everything,
Yeah,
being that crazy madman. I think that's really what I love.
yeah. And then, but then I think that's like you said. There's those people in teams are definitely. I don't know if they're more sought after because again, it's a limited experience I have with the game industry, but I do notice that those people who are like that have like an easier time finding work, maybe fitting the teams better, or maybe able to work on different or multiple projects at once, and then on top of that, can move into the management side because they have experience on like not just making art but also managing teams or art outsourcing or that kind of thing. So that's definitely the future for you, right? Is that kind of path?
Well, it goes back to the management, because if you're hiring for a team, um, assuming you're a decent to really good manager, you're hiring for a team, and you're hiring for a specific person in that team. You know, I specifically said person and not position, because your team might have the problem solver already, and what you need is the artist. You're built, you don't want 10 of me on a team. That's a horrible idea. One is, barely bearable. um it's it really comes down to how you are building your team and what you need at that time. Like, if you need someone who just sits down and like does the work and sits there until he is told to do something different, probably don't want to be hiring me. I'm definitely, taking myself as the only example I know of, is I'm definitely, as a person, um, not just your, you know, execution, right? I'm not just there printing out stuff. I'm buzzing about. I'm over communicating probably.
Yeah,
And so it comes down to, if you're hiring, and you you see that, and you want it on your team, that's great. But so I don't really think that gives you better chances, because in the end of the day, a good portfolio gets you noticed, and that gets you chances for interviews. And for me, my portfolio is sort of, I would say, decent to not really that amazing.
okay,
And really, what you know, I would say what got me into Ubisoft was getting an interview. That was like, I mean, obviously I got the interview, but I impressed enough people to get an interview, to then impress the people in the interview, and they wanted that specific person at that time in that team. And you can extrapolate that to the entire hiring process. Is when we were hiring for Kerno, for example, one of the people, we just needed someone who gets the work done. It was like, we need this, we have 6 months of time, we need you to do this. And it didn't
right.
really matter how they worked with the team. They're working remotely anyway. We just needed someone who gets the work done. It could have been a freelancer, but like, it also goes into how good is the manager that's hiring you, how well do they
Okay,
understand their own team, I would say. And I mean, this is
yeah,
more based on the theories that I've read about, I've learned about, than it is based on actual industry experience, because I don't really think you don't really get too many people who are like, in business school going into being a video games artist. I don't really think there's a big crossover there.
Yeah.
You probably go to like a big company to be a manager there, which is probably where you get some more money. so
Right. Yeah.
it's interesting, I think. If you want to get hired, have a good portfolio. That's probably your best shot.
Right. Yeah. Well, but like you said, it's not all artists are good managers, or not all managers are good artists. Like, it's the whole thing where there's a weird Venn diagram where there's a crossover, of people who match certain skills together that are valuable to a production based company where, making games now is a business. You need some sort of business management within that can organize and task people and find and research new stuff in tech and make the production pipeline more no more productive, but flow better or integrate better. But then that's where your weird crossover comes in, where no weird, but more common, would be that people are getting into 3D art because they want to be a 3D artist, whereas you want to also be an artist, but you have a more affinity for the production side of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's certainly, well, you said this before we started recording, or I think maybe even whilst we were already talking. Like, I have this weird curvy path, and if you look at it, it looks like I just come out of uni and now I'm at Ubisoft, and what a great start to a career. But there is 10 years of baggage, of 10 years of kind of learning everything that will help me in 10 years. and
Yeah.
and I think, if someone is just starting out, or if someone is about to go into uni, or someone is thinking about going to uni, someone, like, how do you get started, is you have to understand yourself, you have to understand what you're good at, you have to understand what you're not good at. I think, being a confident person means that you know what you're lacking, and
Yeah.
you're comfortable talking about this, right? I'm comfortable saying that I don't know how to sculpt, and I suck at making base materials and Substance Designer. I
Hmm.
love Substance Designer for automation, for mass generation, for integrating it into again automation pipelines. But I know that if you're hiring me, and if we were in an interview right now, and you said, oh, we need you to mostly do base materials, I'd be like, okay, guys, you don't hire me, I'm not the right fit
Yeah.
for you. And
Yeah.
I think having that comfortable self-knowledge, that means you can then decide how to approach it. And I approach it saying, I'm going to go to university, I'll have to spend money. I have 3 years of time that I'm buying myself to push to become a 3D artist in AAA. And it nearly didn't work out. It only worked out because I met the right people at the right time who saw something in me.
Yeah. Yeah. And then again, it's a thing where yeah, I'm trying to think how I'm trying to say this, but definitely as a game developer and somebody who can multitask, it's one of these things where you could see people running their own studio, you could see people run their own projects, which you are. So I think that's why uh games artists sometimes, or people who are artists or try in the industry, maybe fail, is because they can't marry the industry side of the job with the artistic side, because like you said, they want to make art all day, but they can't think about production schedules or meetings, or like I know
Mm.
people have done this whole thing where there's a switch over between freelance and studio life. Like there's a very big 50-50 split. Like people either want to be completely freelance and completely their own boss, or they want to go and be part of a team and work on a project. And I think the people who understand the production side of it probably more, or want to be part of that kind of cog in the machine, would definitely fit more into that side of it. Whereas people who maybe struggle with that, or aren't as naturally into that thing, they then want to do the freelance path because they want to just have their own schedules, their own deadlines. So you'd probably fit in category A more than B, right?
I mean, I mean, yeah, but I would also say that at large, it's probably less a category and more a, timeline, basic, not timeline. What's it called? Whatever, like a slider, right?
Right, yeah.
It's You get a lot of people who are comfortably in the middle, who want to be a cog in a machine and just do art, because you can
Right.
absolutely do that. Like,
Mhm.
because your lead is setting your deadlines most of the time, you know how fast you are, so you can set your time estimates. But
Yeah.
I think being a cog in a machine is very easy in a studio, large or small.
Right.
And you get people. I would certainly say I'm on the extreme on most things usually.
Yeah.
You're not saying good or bad, but I'm saying just extreme. Like I work 18-hour days sometimes. I
Yeah.
certainly did
Yeah.
in uni, or more than that.
Yeah.
That's an extreme thing to do. You probably shouldn't be doing it. But
Yeah.
someone like me, I hate being a cog in a machine.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I love being in the studio and I love problem solving. So
Right.
I think there's an endless complexity there,
Mm-hmm.
of a constant struggle to fit in, or to realize how you fit in with other people, how other people see themselves, how they actually are. There's a
Right.
disconnect. I mean, certainly for everyone, um,
Mm-hmm.
myself included. I don't want to sound like I know myself.
Mm.
Where you come across in a way and you think you're coming across in a way and you think you know how you are and someone else thinks something about you, and there's this whole dynamic. In a freelance scenario, maybe there's less of that. There's, because you get to just do a contract here and a contract there. I don't really know. I've never done any real freelance. I've always been with companies that I worked longer projects with. But
Right.
certainly I think working from home is a lot easier to just do the art, because you can, if you want to, just shut off the chat and just not look at it. In a studio, the more you are around people, um, the more human interaction you have in real life, the harder it gets to pretend to be someone. So, like
Right.
right now is a great example, right? I think most people in the industry are now suddenly working from home, or from home again, and
Yeah.
hopefully everyone is safe and healthy. But it some people really hate it. Some people, they love being around people. Some people are suddenly seem different because some of the social outlets they have changed.
Right.
Maybe someone seems more productive all of a sudden because being around people does slow you down sometimes. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, it's again, it's endless complexity, and that's also what personally interests me. Because if you are
Right.
leading the team, then your
Mm-hmm.
job is to figure out endless complexity, which you will never achieve. And I said, there's no such thing as a good manager, because
Right.
nobody actually knows how to do it, right? Nobody
Right.
actually really, like, if someone tells you, oh, this is how you are a good manager, then sure, they're probably really self-secure and they probably know what they're talking about. But
Mm-hmm.
no plan survives first contact. In reality, there's so many factors, and then someone's cat dies at home, right, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
There's so much to consider that 24 hours isn't enough.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well when you look at like how you've experienced the industry and how you look at your part as wanting to be the management side of it or the production side of it. It's interesting to think back of when I was watching the God of War making of documentary. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Raising Kratos,
Yes.
and the I'm trying to remember who the guy was specifically, but I think he was one of the CFOs or CEOs of Sony America at the time. But he was talking about how like in 1980 something, like he started as a game tester for Sega. So he's like, he's went from there, start point a QA tester in Sega, to running Sony America. So like, I think it's one of these things where if you have a love for the industry and a love for just like every job in it and every part of it, you'll probably find quickly that you will move up, to different positions really fast, because people like that are rare, where they love, every aspect of the industry and everything about it, because there's people who will do 3D art, for instance, like you said, won't enjoy the tech side of it, or won't enjoy even the UV side of it, but then they will be like, they'll try to talk to coders and they'll be like, oh, I don't understand what you're talking about, but then you can kind of wrap your head around what coders are talking about. So I think people who have a more multidiscipline or team approach are the guys who end up leading teams, end up leading studios, end up leading projects. And I think, in essence, that's probably like a really good thing for you, because then that dream will be realized eventually, and you'll probably get a shot at actually like running your own studio project team at one point. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that is a positive thing.
Well, it's you say you talking
Mm-hmm.
maybe about me, but I think in general, it's stones usually fall in the correct place, because unless you're extremely introverted, you're probably already pushing, or at least showing where you want to go.
Yeah.
And you give it 30 years and you'll probably get there if you just consistently exhibit that behavior of wanting to be that. um,
Yeah.
people will like you will meet the right people, they will mold you. And I'm always been a big fan of just saying what I want.
Yeah.
Sometimes it hurts me, sometimes it helps me. And I mean, I can directly tell you how I got to Ubisoft, and it all starts with me doing, wanting to be a games journalist, meeting the right people, sticking around the right people, having a gut feeling, suddenly getting a job out of it, then meeting people, becoming an artist, meeting people again, and then somehow ending up at Ubisoft. Like that whole thing, is it, and it's only because I saw a game on Steam and I texted the developer, right, 10 years
Right.
ago.
Yeah.
So yes, you can start at the very bottom, and you can go wherever you want. And obviously that not honestly that documentary that you talked about, if people haven't watched it, it's amazing. To me, it's, I was talking to a lead of mine, and he was saying like, oh, this is so great, I would love to work for Cory Barlog. And then I said to him, I said, I don't want to work for him, I want to be him. Like, that documentary certainly makes it seem like he is a really great he's really great at his job. That's certainly what the documentary makes it look like. I don't know him, so I don't really know if that's true. But I think
Right.
there
Yeah.
is lots of things you can learn if you're, certainly inclined the way of going that direction. You can learn of, you should be there for your team.
Hmm.
You should be the first to stand up, and you should be the last to sit down. And you should, your team. It's a team. Video games is teamwork, and you don't matter because everyone else does.
Right.
That's sort of always been, I'm always wrong, everyone else is right, and I have to help other people to be better. That's always how I approach most of the things, really. Is I don't it I mean, that is a very extreme thing again, where,
Hmm.
look out for yourself. Don't, like, I have moments where doing all of that really is lots of baggage, where sometimes I break myself. So
Yeah.
it's not really advisable too much. But I think, you see this again on a Dynasty Discord, is there's so much love and just helping each other, learning together, becoming better. It doesn't matter if you're a senior of 15 years in the industry or just starting out. Everyone can learn from everyone. And
Yeah.
I can teach someone Blender, they can teach me a bit of experience they had before. It's try to be helpful, try to put others first, and I think that will, in the end of the day, give you opportunities. And
Yeah.
you will have goals. My goal is, I want to end up as a creative director, and I want to end up in Canada. Those are my two goals. And I've had
Hmm.
those goals for, well, I had the one goal for a decade, and I had the other goal for a couple of years now.
Right.
And everything I do, I check against those goals, and I say, okay, I'm working on a personal art scene right now, which parts of it I'm going to use in my personal project Sales of War, parts of it I might use in a different project I might be working on.
Hmm.
um, some of it I might be able to bring back into work and tell people how I've done something, maybe we can improve something.
Right.
How does that get me towards my goal? Well, because maybe I can impress the right people in the right position to get a step closer to my goal, right? Like, set a goal, and then check if what you are doing is leading you towards that. And it doesn't matter if you're more of the artist side or more of the management side. If you want to be an amazing artist and you want to become the principled artist or a senior principal, senior expert artist, go for it.
Hmm.
That's amazing. That, if you are the guy who can just produce the most amazing looking art, chances are I want to hire you for my team. And
Yeah.
and I think that's really, it's being the guy who stays on the line shouldn't be a negative, right?
Right.
It shouldn't be everyone's goal to become a manager, because there's no shame in staying on the line and becoming the expert. I
Right.
actually think it's to me, being the expert is a much greater achievement than managing the expert. You can
Right.
go from junior to being a lead, and not because, like, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he doesn't have enough experience. No, because being a lead means that you're leading the team, and sure, there will be moments where you have to listen to your team because they know better than you. But
Hmm.
I'm definitely not talking about myself, because my own goal is I never would like to go from a junior to a lead position. I want to stay a level artist for the next couple of years, certainly for maybe for a decade. But I've
Right.
seen people do that jump because it's a management position. Maybe they have a degree in it. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're a good manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, all stones I think fall in the right location, and sometimes that hurts. Sometimes you get cut from a team.
Right.
I have in the past, teams have changed. Projects I worked on got shelved or got canceled, and you
Mm-hmm.
spend 50 hours over 3 days, and on Monday morning you get told it's been canceled. And my first reaction was, well, what is the next thing we do? It's
Yeah.
it, this industry will punch you when you're down, but it'll
Mm-hmm.
also, it'll show the greatest in people, and it'll also show the worst in people. And
Right.
to me, it's a very interesting industry.
Yeah.
It's not just 9 to 5, and then we all go home because I don't know. You're an accountant. Well, no, that's don't want to harken on that. It's an old trope. But if you're an accountant, that's great. I probably need one soon.
Yeah.
But it's not just I'm pushing papers from left to right and then I'm going home. We all live and breathe this.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
hard sometimes to shut off on the weekend, and you have to shut off on the weekend.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's also, especially once you get past, like, there's an initial burst of energy, but then initially you have to start thinking about balancing life, and then, but then you're obviously, how old are you actually? Because I didn't know ask how old you were.
Well, that's the dreaded question that I hate. I am 26 now.
Okay, so
But
yeah, so still relatively young. So yeah.
so yeah, I mean, when I started in the industry as a full-time job in the industry, I
Mhm.
would say I was too young.
Okay.
Um, I was, I guess, 19, just
Yeah, but then
19.
but
Yeah.
then there has been people I know who have came into the industry at 19 years old and are now some of the people who are the most iconic in the industry. And I think if you're starting at that age, it is because you've had that whole back catalogue. So once you're hitting 30, once you're getting to that point in your life, like, you have had this 10-year experience. You've worked on all these teams and all these projects, and so it used to be when guys had careers through their 20s, it wasn't as expansive as it is now. You talk about, Ian McHugh talks about how, you've got people right now in their, late 20s, early 30s who are drawing like they've been drawing for 60 years because the learning exponential is just like infinity,
Yeah.
because people
Yeah.
learn so quickly, and there's so much information available to you at hand.
Well, that's the thing is people people 20 coming out of university right now are
Mhm.
probably way better than 50-60% of the industry.
Yeah,
It's more important than ever to have soft skills, but
right,
also
yeah.
to understand where the future is going. Because well, this is more of a personal prediction, but
Mhm.
um, in the last 10 years, I've sort of the way I do things has changed, obviously, but
Mhm.
if you look at it, nothing's really been disrupted. We had
Mhm.
evolutions. You could say maybe the different rendering models and going to PBR is a disruption, but I don't really think it is. It just required new tools, and it required to Does it really matter if you pack a metalness map together with your specular or your roughness or whatever PBR you're in? But um,
Yeah,
it's not really been a disruption. It's not gone from 2D to 3D, where suddenly it's like, oh, Sonic didn't really work out that much, or how do you make a side scroller into a 3D game? We haven't had
right.
a disruption for a while, and
Yeah,
tools change, art get
yeah,
easier to make. Substance Painter makes it easier because I don't have to do every single map in Photoshop myself. It takes less time to make art, and it'll
yeah.
continue to evolve that way. Like I have predicted, or I am predicting that in the next 5 years, I honestly believe that vegetation speed tree will just be redundant for most applications. And
Right.
don't get me wrong, I absolutely love people who do great vegetation. That's an
Mhm.
amazing thing to see, but most of the plants that we know, we can describe in generators and just generate trees on the map with Houdini, and then uh, they grow around the objects that we've placed in the map. They look more realistic, and then we can
Right.
still use automation to condense those down into 5, 6, 7 differences because we can figure out, which tree kind of looks the same than the other does. And suddenly it's like, well, we used to make every tree by hand and place every tree by hand. Now we're spawning it with, these tools. And so, yeah, everyone gets better at art. Every art gets better itself. Tools get better. We're constantly in an arms race to make better art. But in 5, 10, 20 years, the next disruption will come. If you watch the Gabe Newell interview with IGN just now with about Half-Life Alyx, I think it's a couple days old or weeks old.
Okay.
He talks about, sort of the Elon Musk neural link and connection. And he straight up basically, he seems like something he's been looking into for a while. And he straight up says that if you're not looking at it as a media company, you should, because you will, movies will change, games will change. We can all of a sudden just give you the image in your head, maybe in 10 years, 20 years, whatever. But there will be that disruption. And, going back to, hey, I'm just an artist, I'm making art. Yeah, that will change the way it's always changed. To me personally, the easiest way of protecting the future is to grow into a position where I can adapt to the new tools, right? We started out talking about Blender. We can go full circle. It's a new tool that now people are starting to use. If you're able to pick it up quickly, tomorrow there might be a new tool, or you might be changing jobs to a new engine. Like tools don't matter. Your understanding of problems and your understanding of art is all that matters. And if vegetation becomes redundant, maybe you can still become the tech guy who places, because there still has to be the human pass on how stuff looks. And you can still retain that. Your position will change. But if you go down the road of specializing yourself to do one thing, and then that one thing falls away, then you don't have a job anymore. So many jobs in history, the waker-upper or whatever it was called, right? The guy knocking on everyone's door because he had a watch and nobody else had one in the 1700s. That's not a job anymore. Maybe in parts it is, but no, we have alarm clocks now. So that guy's job is gone. But if he built this whole repertoire of also delivering the morning news, all of a sudden he just becomes a paper boy, and then maybe he also brings in the milk and the ice, and everything is fluid in the world. You have to be too. And I think there is your future. And I don't know where we're coming from. I kind of went down this whole thing.
No. But I get what you're saying, man. I understand with the meaning behind what you're saying is. But yeah, anyway, so I mean, we've talked at length about a lot of things, and we're kind of hitting the hour mark now. So people might be falling asleep or either tuning into something else at this point. But yeah, if you stayed to this point, thank you very much for being with us up to this point. Thanks to Lukas for coming on and speaking to us. It was definitely informative, definitely a roller coaster of ideas, but I think we should try and get Lukas on again at one point to talk about more things. If you guys have any questions in particular about stuff we've covered on the podcast, or things that Lukas maybe specializes in and you want to ask deeper questions on it, then we can organize maybe a Q&A at one point. And if you leave any questions below, I'll make sure I get them to him, and then we can kind of continue this conversation. But again, thanks to Lukas for coming on. It was an honor, man. I definitely loved listening to everything you had to say.
Thank you very much for having me on. And obviously, yes, I'd be absolutely happy to answer questions. Just, I want to say one thing very specifically, if people are still listening. A lot of the things that I'm saying are meant to be thought-provoking, right? Don't take everything on face value. Like, oh, he said, no. Just think about things and their opinions and their ideas. They're not necessarily like golden truths, I want to make sure that people consider and think and overthink things. I think that's very important too.
Yeah, definitely. I think if we wanted to have the same opinion on constantly, then we just have the one person on over and over again. But having a mix of people on is definitely what keeps the things like podcasts fresh and keeps ideas pursuing new stuff. So again, guys, thanks for staying this long if you're still around, and make sure to check us out on other podcast services. We're on many of the listen services around the world, including YouTube, where we have a kind of live premiere every time an episode goes up. Again, leave questions if you want. Get back to me and let me know how you enjoyed the episode. Thumbs up and like, share as always. And thanks to Lucas again, and we'll see you guys later on. Thanks, guys. Bye.